Sorry about that. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Stephen. It's another episode of Dyslexia Discussions and More. And the topic we've got today is executive function, or sometimes it's actually called executive function, plural, because there's more things happening than just one. Stephen, how are things in Texas today?
Hot. With a well, actually, we have a cold spell. It's just right at about 100 degrees.
Wow,
This week we've been up to 108. So
that's a little much.
yeah, yes, it is. So executive function. It's this is a pretty interesting topic. We have a whole lot of our parents that are hearing about executive function from the school districts, and you may be hearing about it from other podcasts. And it sounds, when you hear about executive function, it sounds like it is something that you can train, something that you can, learn how to do skills with executive function or build your executive function skills, which that's all true. However, what I would like to do, and Dr. Conway would like to do, is let's take this back to what is executive function, how is it built, and how does executive function play with our children who have learning disabilities. So, Dr. Conway, do you want to start out with just talking a little bit about what is executive function? Where does it, in the hierarchy of skills, where does it lie? And why is it so important to make sure that we have that executive function intact along with our other sub-level or layered skills?
I think it's going to be probably surprising to folks to hear there's really not a universally accepted definition of executive function. We know it involves planning, organizing, reasoning, inhibiting, control. There's different aspects of it. And let's just throw up this one graphic here that says, okay, here's potentially some components of executive function. There's a working memory component. But that's like saying there's a muscle component. There's all kinds of muscle, things in the body. There's multiple types of working memory. There's auditory working memory. There's visual working memory. There's sensorimotor working memory. Can you use your body and organize it in a way and adjust it and modify it? So these things are very simple in this graphic, but they're really very complicated when you start to break them down. But it gives people at least a starting point to understand that, you've got working memory. It helps your child hold information like rules, because that's more language working memory. But you also can have a working memory of like sports. You're watching batting, and you're watching batting practice, and you're getting the image in your mind of how you actually swing the bat, where your feet are supposed to be, and which way you're supposed to turn. And it's all those different components of these series of steps. And then it's partly working memory because you're trying to gauge, are you executing those steps the way your coach was teaching you? So there's actually a kind of a self-monitoring piece of that working memory part as well. And then there's cognitive flexibility, which is really your ability to switch between tasks, to kind of understand multiple things at one time, and also to be able to adapt to change. Something's not going the way you want it to go. Can you come up with a new plan, quote, on the fly or quickly and easily?
Can we talk about that piece of it a little more? Because I know, a lot of our children that have learning disabilities, they struggle a lot in this area.
Yeah. And many times it's because our kids who have learning difficulties, or our teens, or even our adults who have learning difficulties, try to avoid the things that they're not good at and stay in the realm of the things that they are good at, that they're able to do. And so that way they're not really going to look bad. They're not going to, perform poorly. And that's, just an innate thing we all want to do. We all want to be able to perform at our best. And so sometimes they're trying to control the environment or control the task, because if you make them do the task with more motor skills and their struggle to coordinate their motor skills, they know they're not going to be as good at it. So they're going to not want to do that. And so then our, individuals look like they're inflexible, but they're actually exercising their executive functions because they're trying to avoid things they know they can't do. Well, if you then have a model to say, well, if we know somebody really struggles with, say, coordination, motor skills, and we know somebody doesn't struggle with language skills, they're more likely to use language for their flexibility than they are their motor skills. But the opposite can be true as well. You can have somebody who's really good with motor skills and they can do all kinds of sports things, and they're really flexible, creative with their application of their skateboarding or even their art and their art drawing, which is there's a motor skill, but they're really more rigid when it comes to academic information or language models because they struggle to use words to communicate, but they communicate really well with pictures, images, or objects.
So think about what our dyslexic children go through when put in a classroom, mm-hmm. and the teacher starts doing round robin reading. Well, for our parents out there, really what I hear you talking about, I really equate to fight or flight.
Right. Yeah.
That's where that really comes in, that anxiety piece of it, the fight or flight comes in because it's not, I like the way that you put it. It's not that I'm being inflexible.
Right.
It's gotten to a point as far as in my emotional state that I know that I'm getting ready to be asked to do something, mm-hmm. whether it's run some type of physical activity, kick a ball, go run a mile, read a book, whatever it is that's in that task that's being asked for me to do. It is not just I can't do it today, or I don't know how to do it. It's I've tried to do this many times over and over, and I fail at it all the time. And, I think really if parents would understand just that working piece of it,
right,
we would get away from the mantra or the thought process of let's don't worry about your struggles, your mm-hmm. deficits, your weaknesses, only worry about your strengths. That's, I want parents to hear that and understand that that's where that thought process comes from.
Right.
While you are right, we don't want your child to go into that mental state of I'm a failure, I can't do it, I'll never be able to do it, so on and so forth, to, hey, we're going to work on these low areas, your deficits, and we're going to bring those up to your skills, your higher skills, and make sure that you are level set across, and you can be that superpower. That's right. Really what that's the message that we want to give our kids, so they understand that this is a short time, or should be. Let me say it that way. Yeah, this should be a short time in your life that you're going to deal with this, and we're going to make sure that we get you the resources and help to not only deal with that cognitive flexibility or right. Inflexible,
right,
in that area. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and your point about it seems very functional to say, let's avoid the weaknesses and focus on the strengths, which theoretically sounds good, but it actually doesn't prepare the individual for real life, which is the environment's not always going to be present to your strengths. So the question is, can we take weaker skills and make them stronger? And the resounding answer from decades of research is yes, absolutely. So even though literally millions of children and adults have never seen much progress in their spelling skills or their reading skills, that's not genetically inherent in the dyslexia or in the dyscalculia or in the dysgraphia or in even language disorders. That's inherent to, if the brain doesn't get the proper practice and training, it won't build the proper skills. So we have decades of research showing we can actually change the skills that actually improve reading, even in somebody who has severe dyslexia, and pretty much at any age. So knowing that the genetics don't cause the brain to be hardwired, the brain still has lots of plasticity. It can build new wiring in the language cortex. It can build new wiring in the imagery and, mental imagery skills. But you have to have the right type of practice with the right intensity, the right frequency, the right specificity. There's several different elements of the recipe that then helps build these skills and strengthen them. And how that ties into executive functions think of executive functions as a really high level system up here. And below it are all the skills that help support it. So in this graph, they don't even have a word executive functions on it. It's like all of these are part of executive function. So executive function is off the graph, up at the top above self-regulation. So if we make working memory stronger in either imagery working memory or motor skill working memory, or even auditory language working memory, if you strengthen those systems, then it's going to support even more executive function, because you can use words to think, reason, and problem solve. You can use movies to think, reason, and problem solve, which can impact your cognitive flexibility. It can also impact your ability to do cause and effect thinking and to more quickly realize. And this is what all parents are usually hoping that we achieve for our kids before they hit 18 and leave home. We hope we've taught them how to make good decisions, which basically
that right there really ties in with our children who have ADHD. And I mean, if you're looking at this graph, I mean, you can look at it and go, okay, organizing and planning, ADHD, time management, ADHD, working memory, ADHD. I mean, you can start seeing that. Why does your child who has ADHD, why can they go in there and sit in front of a game and hyper focus on that game for hours and hours and hours? But you tell them, hey, I need you to go into your room, pick up all your clothes, make your bed, put your clothes in the laundry room, and then come back and talk to me. And they walk out of the room and go, what did you ask me to do?
Well, they do one of the three things and come back like they're done.
So you can see that you have to build from the lowest level skill upwards in order to make all of the higher skills work effectively.
Yes. And let's switch the graph to go along with that comment, Stephen. Let's talk about executive function of the aspect of memory plus flexibility plus inhibiting plus planning and organizing. And also another model also includes emotional regulation. The one we just said regulation, but there's also emotional regulation. The more earliest development of executive function is sensorimotor. Infants, once they learn how to crawl, see something and they figure out how to organize their body to get across the room to get that thing that they want. They see it's there, they visualize it, they picked up on it, the visual processing's working, like, hey, that looks good. And that's the earliest start of executive functions. They came up with a plan, they had a desire to go get it, they regulated their body motorically and with attention and focus and got themselves over there and got the object. And if it wasn't dangerous, they usually shove it up close to their mouth. If it is dangerous, mom or dad grab it and take it away.
I mean, think about that baby right there. You can see, I mean, it's a still photo, obviously, but you can, if you've been around any babies ever, you can see that little baby sitting there rocking back and forth, trying to figure out, okay, how do I get my legs moving with my arms? Because, man, that block or that TV remote sitting over there, that looks mighty tasty, and I got to get it in my mouth.
Yeah. They've got an idea, and then they've got a plan, and then they execute the plan. And all of that is part of executive function. For our folks who just joined now, I want to say this one statement again. It's really important. There's not a universally accepted definition of executive function. In fact, I have a big book. I think I put it in the other room. It's actually called Blackwell's Dictionary, of neuropsychology terms. I think Blackwell had such trouble finding a universal definition of executive function that in this Bible of neuropsychology terms, they didn't even put the word executive function. And it's because there's lots of ideas about beliefs about what it really is. And overall, we talk about, it's kind of like the conductor of the orchestra. Executive function is the conductor, which is deciding when do the winds do what they should do? When should the string instruments come in? When should they stop? And, and it's coordinating and organizing all of the parts or all of the players. But if your brain doesn't have all these parts in the orchestra, then the conductor can't do as much because there's not as much for him to conduct. And what we say in a neuropsychology perspective is, if you have really weak phonological processing and you have really weak auditory memory, you're more likely not to use words to reason and problem solve very well. And so there's less to execute from because you're forgetting the words. You're forgetting the 3-step tasks mom asks you to do. And that interferes with your ability to execute. So language comprehension can affect executive function. Auditory memory can affect executive function.
So let me add into that. So as you were saying that, and I'm thinking back with just my own kids and myself, and when we are dealing with children that have that issue, and they tend to get angry really quickly, because not only can they not express what's going on, they can't find the words,
right?
And they're upset because you're saying, "Hey, stop! We need to talk."
Yeah,
and they can't even compute that because all they're trying to do is figure out how do I explain to you what is going on,
right?
And then I get angry because I can't find those words.
Yeah.
And then the child becomes that kid that throws himself in the floor and kicks and screams.
And the good example of that is to say, we know there's a really key way to decrease toddler frustration to age 2, what people typically call the terrible twos. And that is, you start teaching kids sign language while you're speaking to them, and you start it at 6 months of age.
100%.
Yeah, if you start American Sign Language at 6 months of age, by 12 months old, your child might have 50 different signs. And yet they might only speak like 5 words because the language comprehension system and the motor control of the hands is developing earlier than motor control of the mouth for speaking. And so when the kids can communicate their wants, their needs, their ideas, even though you're not going to give them everything, they might say cookie all they want. Doesn't mean you're always going to give them a cookie, but at least they're letting you know. And you might say, no, we're going to eat first and we'll get a cookie later. We have to eat other food first, and so that decreases the terrible twos because they're able to communicate and share their ideas, share their thinking. Well, the same thing is true of what you're just talking about, Stephen, is we can have teenagers who struggle to get their words out, struggle to find their words, and it may be more based on their phonological processing. They can't find the words because that sound-based processor is not well built, and they can get the words and they talk around it. And you can as a parent, you're like, I know they're trying to say something, but they're just not saying the word, and they know they're not really saying it either, but they struggle to find it. If you give them 3 choices and say, okay, you're talking about water animals with feathers, or is it a duck? Is it a swan? Is it geese? Like, yeah, geese. That's what I was looking for. You then just provided a prime or a prompt that cued them. And many times kids who struggle to find words, and it is more phonological, if you give multiple choices, they'll pick up on it right away because they know the word they want. It's in that file cabinet somewhere, but they're struggling to find it and to get it out. So consequently, some kids don't use words to plan and organize or for executive function. One of the more severe adults with dyslexia that I worked with, back in the 90s, I was talking with him and I said, Zach, I was just kind of talking something through with myself about a plan. He's like, you did what? I said, not out loud, but like in my head, I was kind of talking this through. He's like, why would you do that? I'm like, why would I talk? I'm like, Zach, I don't understand what you're asking. He goes, I never use words to think in my head. I can't find the words when I speak them, and I can't find the words when I just try to think them either. He said, so I have to use pictures. I have to make a movie. I have to see pictures. Words are so impaired for me. I don't even use words to think, reason, and problem solve. And that kind of gives you an idea of how that language system can either support executive functions, or deficient language skills can inhibit or detract from executive functions and make it harder to really do the higher level reasoning that your brain might be capable of doing. But again, if the conductor's up here and all the members of the orchestra aren't there, you can't produce the same caliber of music because you're missing some of the players on the team. And that's what really is important for parents to understand. Executive function is not just like a separate system you go train by itself. It's above the picture on this graph. It's way above self-regulation. And so if you're missing any of these 6 items down below, you're going to struggle with executive functions. And so we don't need to do executive function coaching training. We need to strengthen these other 6 systems down below, strengthen working memory, help strengthen flexibility, help strengthen inhibitory control. Some of this comes from a sensory-based OT program. Some of it comes from cognitive behavioral type therapies of stop and think strategies or calm yourself down strategies so you don't get too ramped up emotionally. Or we change the phonological system to improve auditory working memory. Or we change and strengthen your mental imagery system, which improves your ability to use images or movies to comprehend, reason, and problem solve. And those systems can be strengthened in a way that then you actually now have provided stronger players on the team, which allows the team to produce higher and do more executive functions. That's a lot.
So I will tag on with you when you started talking about American Sign Language. We use this with our oldest son, Asher. It was amazing that we could communicate. And we started at about 4, 5, 6 months old. And, he could tell you when he wanted something to eat. He could tell you that he wanted to go to take a bath or go to bed or whatever. And it just made him such a more happy child.
Yeah.
And I know that is part of it. But what I want to preface this with, just because we taught him sign language didn't make him any less dyslexic.
Right. That motor skill action here isn't phonological processing. It's not building that phonological system. Let's throw up another model to talk from. Hopefully this is more meaningful to our viewers to understand. Here are the models of how we think some of these things build. We know that infants start building your phonological processing at birth. As soon as you start talking to them, they start hearing sounds, perceiving sounds. We know by around 6 and no later than 8 months of age, infants start watching mom and dad's mouth move. And that awareness of mouth movement visually and feeling of mouth movement, both tactily and kinesthetically for the child themselves, starts to wire with the acoustic. And you start wiring visual plus acoustic plus mouth movement plus mouth awareness of movement. Those 4 systems start building that phonological processor very early on.
And so what do you call that though?
What do I call it in terms of the process of what's happening?
Yeah. So I didn't ask the question right, but what I want our families to know, because they hear about this all the time in schools. So they hear we're going to do multisensory learning.
Right. Yeah.
So what you were just describing is really what multisensory learning is.
And let me clarify it. Schools usually are talking about multisensory learning of answers, using a multisensory strategy to learn some answer, to learn some concept. What we're talking about is neurodevelopmental multisensory brain wiring that builds skills. How does the brain usually build phonological awareness? We know it's part visual, part acoustic, and part oral tactile and oral kinesthetic, which means mouth positioning and mouth movement. And so we're using multisensory not to memorize something, not to memorize what letter says "b," what letter says "duh," and try to memorize it. And we're doing that through visual opportunities and tactile practice and some mnemonic or some picture of this or this to remember which one's "b," which one's "duh." Those are mnemonic memory strategies that can't be, quote, multisensory. But what we're talking about is studying individuals who don't have dyslexia or don't have poor phonological processing. How did their brain do it? What did it build and in what order did it build it? And it's so complicated that there's some researchers like Dr. Patricia Kuhl, who for more than 40 years has just studied language development between one time frame, birth and 1 year old. She's spent 40 years just studying during those 12 months, how does the baby build speaking skills and how do they build listening comprehension skills? It's just that complicated. But in some ways, it's not. In some ways, it's just that simple. That phonological awareness is a neurodevelopmental, which means the parts of the brain that connect together that build this skill. It's pretty clearly well defined. Visual, auditory, and tactile kinesthetic build phonological processing. That's why when schools jumped on the bandwagon of, hey, we're going to do this guy's strategies or this person's strategies, and we're just auditory, acoustic, phonological activities, that missed the whole picture of how the brain actually builds those skills. The brain doesn't build phonological processing by only acoustic input. That would be unisensory processing, not multisensory processing.
So with that being said, well, it's not just our school systems that are saying this, but there's a lot of professionals out there that say, the way to get your child to learn to read is model first. Second, meaning you show your kid or you allow your kid to see you reading a lot. Or the other is read to your kid often and they'll learn to read. And I mean, that's the furthest, while yes, having that experience and being with your parents and reading and being exposed to books is one thing, right? And then being able to actually do the activity, meaning read, is something completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife read to our kids every night for an hour until they were in fifth grade.
Mm-hmm. Which probably built better vocabulary, better word knowledge, and hopefully began to stimulate them to start making movies in their head, start picturing what was happening in Peter and the Starcatchers, what was going on, where were they, what ship are they on, what, galaxy were they flying through. To get that imagery system start to build, that book reading is great. But listening to somebody read doesn't actually teach the child to read.
Yeah, I don't want parents to feel guilty,
right?
Because they didn't read because I wasn't the parent that sat down and read to them.
Mm-hmm.
I always looked at Amy when she was able to do that. I was like, man, that's an experience that I will never have, because I'm not going to sit down and read to them, because number one, I don't want to sit in there at their time of when they're trying to go to sleep and struggle reading whatever, because they were reading Harry.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to sit in there and struggle. So what I ended up doing was I walked in there one day. I was like, all right, it's Daddy's turn to read. And of course they start jumping up and down on the bed and whatever. I go, okay, you go pick up any book on the shelf. I don't care what it is. All three of them jump up and run over and jump on the counter and grab a book and come running over there and hand me the book. And I didn't know this till later, but Amy said she was so amazed at what I was able to do, because she said, I would never be able to do what you just did. And I sat in the other room thinking the exact same thing about her, because she was able to sit in there. And what I was able to do, though, is I took the book and I looked at the pictures and I made up my entire story through the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And I used their names and put them into the book and just made up an entire story. And they loved it. But that was my way in order to experience the same thing that Amy was experiencing through her ability to read without struggling.
And let's clarify for the audience, for those that are new, maybe don't know, Steve and I are both dyslexic. We both have dyslexia genetics. We both have passed our genetics on to our children. But I got prevention at age 5 with early neurodevelopmental, evidence-based intervention to strengthen my system so I didn't form a big gap. And Stephen got remediation, which means the gap was already there. And the reason he made up the story is because he knew he couldn't read the book easily, accurately, and reliably because of the dyslexia. and you didn't get effective remediation until age 45. So some 40 years later, you got empowered like I got when I was 5. And now you would probably go grab a book and sit down and read it to them effortlessly because you're what we call now an empowered dyslexic. You've strengthened those skills. Those don't struggle as much. But let's take that one step further and go to our prime topic of the day. How has that impacted your executive functions? Do you personally feel any different in your executive functions now that it's easier to retrieve words, think of words, use words? Or do you feel it's about the same because you are really always okay with your internal language and your internal imagery, that reading or changing that language function didn't really give you a noticeable change in your executive function?
So the way that I would describe this is I was functional, right? I was able to make it through life. I was a business owner myself. I went into the IT field. I was able to make it.
Right.
Right. But I told this story about, I was sitting in the my studio's parking lot getting ready to do an interview with my guest who had written a big, long research paper. And I sat down and I was like, okay, I've got about 15 minutes before I got to go in here and prep and get ready to go. And I read that entire research paper and I sat back and I went, wow, I really enjoyed that. And then the first thing that popped in my mind was, that's the joy of reading. That's what people are talking about when they say the joy of reading. Wow. In 45, 46 years, I had never experienced that before. With that being said, now that I don't have to struggle so much, and it's not so hard for a daily tasks, whether it's work or just life, I'm able to do those activities without the struggle. So it makes everything else easier. Do I still, have some spelling mistakes? Absolutely. Do I still struggle sometimes when I are reading, when I find a word that I haven't never been exposed to before? Yeah. But what do I have to do? I have to lean into my new skills or my skills. I tell people all the time, this is really where, if you want to talk about use it or lose it, or the more you do, the better you get, this is where that really comes into play. Well, if you just read more, you'll get better. Well, no, I got to build those underlining skills first in order to do the actual reading, to do the actual comprehension, to actually get to the point where I enjoy reading, for that joy of reading. Or, just typing out an email. It used to take me an ungodly amount of time to just type an email, because I would have to go through and edit and revise and send it to my wife and say, hey, I need you to read this, and get her input. And that would go back and forth. That could take 2 hours. And the fact now that I can write a big long email and it take 15 minutes, 10 minutes, that gives me so much more time back. Yeah. That's what to me is amazing, is how much time I gained back just learning to read.
And then you've got more efficiency. And that kind of goes back to this model to say, if you strengthen working memory, you have more executive function. If we work on help our kids learn how to be flexible in thinking, it could be flexibility using words. It could be flexibility using imagery, which means many kids and teens and even adults don't know that you can consciously control what you do with your imagery skills. And you can enhance and build and make those imagery skills stronger. And when you do that, then you've now changed that ability to use movie making to think about options A, B, and C, which increases your cognitive flexibility. Or, you can use words to be that flexible with it as well. And one aspect too, we talked about too, is just this aspect of, here's a kid with food all over his face. He's really struggling with his sensorimotor executive function because he can't coordinate his hands with his mouth to eat this thing without wearing half of it on his face. Now, that said, it's not the easiest thing to do to eat a caramel apple. But this just gives an example of, in the world of the brain development, some of these sensory motor systems and sensory processing systems also are the earlier stages of executive function. The eyes working with the fingers, working with the body, all this coming together is some of the early executive function. And then we pull that all together to say that gives you better working memory, better flexibility, and also stronger inhibitory control. Because if you realize, hey, in the past, when I reached up and I touched that stove, I burned myself. Those are experiential learning things. If you can retain that in memory and retrieve it and recognize the object, you then can execute better safety, better problem solving of what can I do or not do. And then for the older kids, it really becomes focused really more so as you're exiting the elementary school, into middle school, time management becomes a bigger factor. Exiting elementary to middle school, organization and planning becomes a bigger factor. And that only increases in high school, only increases in college, and is massively bigger when you're in life. And then when we all get to be parents, you're like, there's too much to do and not enough time. And you're now at the overload level of there's more things to do than you actually can physically do. And so you're really trying to use your executive functions to plan, to organize, to, compartmentalize what you're doing, to prioritize what you're doing. These executive functions become really critical for life management.
So while you were describing that, the thing that popped in my mind was the kid who can't think of the consequence.
Right.
All they think of is the action. I want to jump off the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it looks great. I got to do it. I got to do it. And they jump off the roof and break their leg.
Yeah.
They don't think about the consequence or the next thing that's going to happen because of executive function skills. So would that also, and this is just a question, would that also be executive function on the child that is paralyzed by fear of overthinking it? You know what I'm talking about? You have the child that gets so upset. I don't even know of a good example.
Mm-hmm. Well, say for example that their child gets up the jungle gym and then freezes.
Yes,
they do not know how to get down. It wasn't too hard to go this and climb up, but their body sensory motor system is not as well developed. And you'll see some kids are super skilled with bilateral coordination, the right side and the left side working together, alternating hands is easy. Other kids are like, no, they want to do both hands because it's too hard to coordinate. Point being that if they recognize now, okay, I don't know how to organize my body, and anxiety goes up, but what anxiety does to the brain, it really kind of shuts down this front part of the brain, which is your executive function. This is the reasoning, problem solving, conductor of the orchestra part of the brain. And so it's going to make it even harder to figure out what to do because you're paralyzed with anxiety or fear and you're, quote, frozen.
And I mean, I know our viewers can really relate with that because we've all we have or been around children that, just shut down.
Yeah.
Regardless if you yelled at them or not, or you raised your voice, or you looked at them a certain way, and they see that and they immediately shut down. I mean, that's part of what we're talking about, also.
100%. And so many folks join the podcast today to find out what can I do about my kid's executive function. There's actually many things that can be done, and one of which is not executive function coaching. That is more of a time management thing. That's really more related to high school, organizing your calendar, organizing your day, allocating time to study your class. That's, executive function coaching is really more towards academic subjects and management of time for academic subjects. But executive function for making my lunch, like how do I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Those are actually sensory motor skills. And that's body awareness, body coordination. And the professionals who have the most training in the brain's system of sensory motor skills and the use of sensory motor skills for functional behaviors, those are occupational therapists, and preferably ones who are certified in a developmental sensory integration perspective of learning. And that's what this model shows. And I don't have a zoomed in model, so I apologize to the viewers. I know it's harder to see some of these things in the bottom. I'll read them off. What this says is proprioception, and the next one over says vestibular, the next long one is interoception, and then it's tactile. So proprioception is your awareness of your body in space. If you have really poor proprioception, you're more commonly going to be seen as the clumsy kid. You know, you're more likely to reach across the dinner table and knock over your milk again. And your parents are like, Johnny, you know, think about where your hands are. Well, if Johnny could do it that easily, he would. It's really more of a body awareness. He's just not aware of how close his hand is to the milk, and that's why it keeps happening. But OTs know how to change proprioceptive skills. Vestibular is kind of like a balance ability, awareness of your body's balance system. Where's your head organized in space? And then interoceptive is your internal awareness of different states, your energy state, internal awareness of your hunger, internal awareness of your toileting. Is my bladder full or not? Many times you'll see 10-year-old boys who are still wetting the bed. Commonly, they have really low interoception, sensory tactile awareness of that sensation of bladder being full. And so it's not waking them up. It's not triggering them. And so many times sensory integration OT is one way to begin to change this actual sensory processing system, which is one way to begin to strengthen those actually executive function skills. And OTs go way above that. And this graph of this upside down triangle is really a developmental OT sensory processing system graph written and designed by a doctorate of OT named Lucy J. Miller. And Lucy J. Miller has spent decades studying and understanding that sensory motor system. And I apologize, her name's not on this graph. It should say Miller 2011. She gave this slide at a presentation of her group's 3D conference or sensory processing conference that they host annually. And this was one of the slides she used to talk about that's what we call sensory pyramid, even though it's an upside down pyramid. But it really was designed to help highlight how those 8 elements down at the bottom, those 5 sensory systems you learned in regular science class, see, hear, touch, taste, and smell, plus the 3 others of vestibular, proprioceptive, and interoceptive. Those are the 8 sensory systems that build all these skills above it. And if you see almost at the very top on the left side, second in the dark purple, is the word executive functions. So OTs have a lot of training in the sensory motor system for executive functions. The sensory motor system for how do I, do functional activities of life, like how do I dress myself? How do I brush my teeth? Those take executive function skills, and they take body awareness and body coordination skills. So this is one way you change executive functions. Sometimes it's through sensory motor training with a properly trained OT. Other times it's through language training. When you change and strengthen phonological processing, look up here at the top of the graph, it says meta-linguistics. That means on the left side, it says expressive language. Those are your speaking skills. On the right side, it says receptive language. That's your listening comprehension skills. As you're strengthening your language skills over time, and it comes from part phonological and part mental imagery semantics, you then build the written language skills, but then when they're all stronger, you now have what we call meta-linguistics, which is the ability to use words to think, reason, and problem solve. And so for other kids, they don't have many deficits in the sensory motor system. They're exceptional athletes. They have great fine motor skills. They have never struggled with, brushing their teeth or blowing their nose or riding their bike. But they do struggle with language, and their verbal communication skills are low. And so that's one system that's actually holding back the growth of their executive function, is the language system. What's not in this graph, Stephen, is attention. And for other kids, attention and impulsivity also can either support and contribute to better executive function, or they can interfere, inhibit, and cause less successful, less efficient executive function.
So the first time I saw the upside down pyramid, as I like to call it,
Yeah.
What I want our viewers to look at is, can you? I'm not sure if you can, with your mouse or your cursor, can you show them where learning, like school learning, really takes place in this graph?
I don't know that they can see my cursor on the screen. It's on there right now, but I don't think it shows up. School learning is up here at the very top in the light purple, just below that pink box that has the black words joie de vivre. And for those of you who are not French speakers, because I'm not, someone had to tell me that means joy of life. And the reason why Dr. Miller put joy of life on the top of her graph is when all of these systems are working, you can, regulate your emotions. You can scale up your energy level when you're at a birthday party. You can scale it down when you're in Catholic Mass. And you can basically get your body to adapt to the environment. Then you actually have a lot more joy in life because you're able to adapt to the demands of life. And so that's why they have school learning success, or learning and school success, way at the very top of this pyramid.
So the other piece of it, though, is look where attention is.
Yeah.
Attention is in that orange box just above your sensory inputs. So when Dr. Conway was talking about those of us that were good athletes, natural athletes, look at where that falls, those skills fall, and how far down they are when it comes to actual learning, school learning. Right. And how many more skills that you have to build on top of all that before you have the success in school learning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when I first saw this chart, I was like, this makes so much sense to me, because now I can start seeing how, if I have attention problems and moderation problems, how that directly affects, just the next level up.
Right.
And those skills. And then I'm just like, wow, this right here, this slide really, for me and my advocacy, really just explained why our kids have so many issues when it comes to being in school, and why they're typically not successful in the remediation once they get to school.
Right.
And why, and how all the behaviors and all of the negative impacts with learning disabilities come, and why that looks the way it does. I mean, this was such an eye opener for me when I first saw this slide.
Nice, and that's the purpose of these slides. Is that they're not perfect. They're just a way to try to represent some of the things that we've learned about the body and brain development. But let's go back to this other piece here and look at the very bottom of this slide where it says arousal regulation. That's very much deep in the brainstem. It's what we call the reticular activating system. That's where acetylcholine then gets to the brain, and acetylcholine actually starts to fuel attention and focus. What that helps highlight is there's multiple things that actually improve attention. And some of the key first four are sleep, allergy modification or allergy management, healthy diet, and regular physical exercise. Those four things for all of us will empower better attention, better focus, which is one way, again, that drives better executive function. Because with better attention, you'll be better able to organize and plan. With better attention, you're going to have better time management skills too, because you'll be more aware of time and time passing and can do a better job of organizing. Attention also affects working memory. And probably one way all the viewers can think of this is you probably aren't going to want to do your taxes when you've got a head cold and you feel really run down, because your attention is also really run down. And you're more likely to make, quote, careless errors when your attention system is low, because it affects your ability to focus, your ability to process numbers or words, and it affects your working memory. So the other thing to think about with attention is, if we take these academic language skills, these 4 written skills in the middle here, reading and then spelling and then writing and then math. And by the way, those are listed in developmental hierarchy of complexity. Reading is strong and difficult in some ways, but spelling is harder than reading. Written composition is harder than spelling and reading, and math is harder than all of them because math is actually a foreign language with operations. And so as this system builds, and if your reading gets stronger, it takes less effort, which means it depletes your attention less. So you've indirectly boosted attention by strengthening reading skills. As you make spelling easier and spelling gets stronger because we know how to remediate and strengthen spelling skills, then you've indirectly also boosted attention. As you've trained written composition skills and used imagery to support written composition skills, what that means is as your children begin to learn that the words they write on the paper have to build a movie in the reader's brain. And if the words say, I see the thing by the place next to the stuff, well, that is a grammatically correct sentence and it is a complete sentence. It's not incomplete. It's not a fragment, but it really doesn't give anybody a clear picture of movie because all the words are too vague. So in understanding that your words have to build a movie, it helps lead the kids to use more picturesque, more descriptive words. Like I saw the small white poodle go down the brown dirt road next to the green grassy field with an orange sunset. Okay, now I've given color and position and direction, and all those things start to build the movie. And that then really also helps indirectly boost attention because language processing is getting stronger. So I want to be sure that folks understand that we're not actually advocating for executive function coaching. We're advocating for change the systems that are below executive function because then they actually feed up into executive function. Better language skills means better executive function. Better attention supports better executive function. Better auditory memory also helps support better executive function. Better awareness of and ability to modulate and regulate your emotions, which a lot of times comes part from OT and part from psychology, also helps you have better executive function because it keeps your mind in a more calm learning and function state.
Yeah, I like to explain to people all the time that I use a computer analogy.
Yeah.
And for those of us that are old, we remember Windows 3.1 or Windows 98. When you sit there and you click on something and it sits there and spins, spins and spins. Well, the main reason why I was doing that is one of a couple of either you don't have enough memory in your computer, your hard drive is too slow, your processor is too slow.
Right.
Well, these are the same things that we're dealing with in the human body.
Yeah.
Your processor is working overtaxed and it's trying to do too many things. Therefore, it won't take in any more information and it won't let any more information out. Same thing we're dealing with here. So it's just a good visualization of those of us that are older and have been in computers or worked with computers a lot. That's what our mind does. When it's just like the Microsoft Windows little spinning dial saying waiting, waiting, waiting. Our brain does the exact same thing.
Yeah, that's it. It's got all those systems that may be working less efficient. Well, Stephen, I think we've done a good job of trying to tease apart and help the viewers understand executive function is a really complicated concept. It has to do with reasoning, problem solving, planning, intent to carry something out, also emotional, regulation, mood regulation. All these things all are parts of executive function. And to change executive function, it's up here in the brain's cognitive system. You have to change the lower level systems that actually support it and help build it up as well. So understanding there's this developmental hierarchy model of motor skills getting stronger, build better executive function. Language skills getting stronger supports better executive function. Attention, regulation, emotional awareness that can come from OT or psychotherapy builds better executive function. So understanding how we take that developmental approach hopefully gives parents a better way to understand if your child's having trouble problem solving and reasoning, there may be a language component contributing to that. If your child is struggling to actually engage in sports and physical activities that are more physical activities, there actually may be a sensorimotor piece that interferes with the ability to engage in those things. And consequently, they don't have really great executive function for how to coordinate their body for lacrosse versus tennis versus something else. Those coordination systems aren't building, and they don't support that executive function for playing sports. So last comments on your side. Anything else that you'd like to say as well?
I want to answer Amy's question here.
Yeah, good question.
Are there sensory integration OTs that treat adults? And the answer is absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. We've had a gentleman in his 40s and even people in their 50s do sensory integration OT at the Moore Center clinics. We've had 20-year-olds who are college students who couldn't, one was a Ivy League grad who got put on probation in the first year of medical school. Turns out needed some sensory integration OT, had a lot of visual perceptual problems affecting their ability to do, laboratory studies of the neuroanatomy. And yeah, sensory integration OT to a 20-year-old, that person is now a functioning, practicing surgeon today, but couldn't get through medical school in year one because of some of these sensory processing issues in their 20s. So there's never a time when you can't change those systems. The brain's neuroplasticity of rewiring and rebuilding is lifelong. As long as you're alive, these systems, these skills can still be trained.
So I guess to wrap it up, I'll say I just want parents to understand that if you are sitting across the table at your campus, your school district, and they're telling you, well, your child has ADHD, or he has ADHD, dyslexia, whatever. I want you to peel back the onion even further and really investigate, are there other things that we need to be looking at for remediation? Because just like we saw in the Joy of Life graphic, if we don't make sure that those underlying skills, those underlying sensory inputs are working efficiently as possible,
right,
that we're going to struggle even more trying to get that remediation for dyslexia, for ADHD, for dysgraphia, whatever. So it's always better to look at, am I doing all of the other things that are going to support the remediation, and try to get, yes, you can do them simultaneously, but trying to get those done as quickly as possible. Therefore, the rest of it is easier.
Right. And we'll use this comment from April as a segue to what we could talk about in another show. April's asking, is there a screener for the need of sensory OT? And, the answer is, okay, look at all these skills that your kid does: eating skills, tying shoes, visual skills, spatial awareness, left, right, coordination. If there's any sensory motor difficulties your child is having that aren't going away as they get older, or any difficulties in this pyramid, their oral motor skills, they have trouble coming up with ideas of what to do with stuff in a gym or an activity place. These are all screeners for reasons why you might want to get more OT. And there's a difference in how people approach OT, and we should talk about that at another talk, which is what is a screener of like a 30-minute evaluation versus the Moore Center Clinic's OT evals usually about 4 to 6 hours, because we're measuring skills with the intent of changing them in treatment. So understanding all those pieces, then we appreciate the question, April, and we'll have to come back to that at another episode because we're all out of time tonight. So Stephen, thanks a ton for all the parent balancing back and forth. We take the brain science and the parent advocacy piece and try to bring the two together. And thanks to our viewers for taking the time to join us and all the great questions. And we hope you'll share this with others, subscribe to the channel, share it across YouTube and social media platforms. We're here to help bring developmental science to parents and families to understand how to help your kids have more of that joie de vivre, more of that joy of life experience. Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you again next week. Next Friday at noon is another episode of Dyslexia Success Stories. We're bringing folks back that we treated 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 25 years ago. The Moore Center has been helping empower individuals since 1986. We've got more than 38 years of expertise, which means I can easily go find someone who came to the Moore Center 30 years ago. And maybe they were 8, and now they're 38. Maybe they were 20, and now they're 50. So that's what that Dyslexia Success Stories podcast is about, is what happened after we changed these skills 1, 3, 5, 10, 30 years later. Have a great night. Stephen, thanks again for all the great time and support and questions. We'll see everybody again next week for Dyslexia Success Stories, and in 2 weeks for another episode of Dyslexia Discussions.
Thanks and take care.